Welcome back, Raw Thoughts listeners, to another episode where I bring on individuals and we just talk about their lives, where they've gone, where they've been, and where they're heading. So my name is Mackenzie Tiggs. I'm a local realtor in the Treasure Valley. So if you are ever looking to buy, sell, or invest, even just have questions about our real estate market, I encourage you to shoot me an email, find me on Instagram or Facebook, and let's connect. So today I have Bryan Walker. He has been an avid listener, someone from the start that has just kind of followed along with the podcast, found it on Instagram. We've been able to connect. So if you are like Bryan and you just know that you have something that you want to share with the world, I encourage you to head over to my website, rawthoughtspodcast.com, and send me a message. You can email me at m.rawthoughts@gmail.com. or find me on Instagram. When you do any of those, I would encourage you also to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. So other than that, Bryan, welcome on.
Thank you so much. I feel like this has been a long time coming.
Yeah.
Like, you're coming up on a year now, aren't you? Like February?
Yeah, February will be a year.
I think it wasn't, maybe I started listening to shortly after, I think, when you and I first connected, and I was just like, wow, this is awesome, and I feel like all these ties like made me so drawn to it, obviously, first responder yourself, was it your aunt who used to own World Nutrition in Nampa?
My grandma and aunt used to own
That's
World
right.
Nutrition.
Yeah. And I used to shop at that store.
Oh, fun.
Back when I lived closer over in that area. And then your stepdad.
Yeah.
Dave.
Yep.
Dave's what a solid guy.
You've ran calls with him, right?
Long time ago when I first got started my career. So I think he was kind of towards the tail end of his. He was a little salty by the time I ran into him, but he nothing but good things to say about him as far as my interactions go. So
yeah, there's some times that I wish I worked as a paramedic with him, just because I think his demeanor gets to a lot of people where he's serious in the face, but he's actually joking. And I know so many people, the county that I worked for, they also worked with him, and they're like, oh my gosh, I think your dad hates me. I was like, nah, I think he's just joking with you. And they're like, no, like he did this. I was like, oh, he's totally joking with you, and you fell for it. You fell for it hard.
I know. And yeah, it's just one of those things, he has that presence about him too. He's just like kind of stoic, and you're just like, what is that guy thinking right now? But I mean, like I said, solid medic from my experience, and I definitely learned something from him when I first started. Good. It was good, fun times. So
good. So you have a story.
I do.
Share it to us. Let's start diving into it.
Well, where do I even start? I guess I'll kind of just go off of I guess I'll just start from the beginning. I was born in Washington, Seattle. If I recall, you were also born there.
I was born in Vancouver.
Vancouver? Yeah. Okay. So you didn't really stay long over there.
No, my mom stayed there I think we moved back when I was like a year old.
Okay.
So I was not born in Idaho, but I am native to Idaho.
Okay.
I mean, I was less than a year old when we came back. So
okay. All right.
Idaho all the way.
Okay. Well, that's okay. I'm just kidding. No, actually, I love Idaho. I've been here for 12 years now, and I'd say I'm native now. So, but yeah, I grew up in Seattle. I had let me see, my parents they divorced when I was 3, which is a bummer. My brother I have an older brother. We both have the same parents, and just growing up with single mom was, for a time period, it was rough. Just kind of struggled. I remember the days of powdered milk. Have you ever had that experience?
I have not.
I don't recommend it. But we did. My mom, she worked in real estate as well over in Seattle, and like, as you know, it's feast or famine, right? Mm-hmm. So there was some times where it was hard, and there were some times where it was good. But my mom worked her ass off just to provide for us. So I have a lot of respect for single moms and anybody who's in real estate, because it's a hard market. Even with it on fire right now. I mean, it's just a matter of time before it, it kind of levels out or drops. So, but yeah, I just always had this calling to like help people. I recall like third grade, I had a childhood friend of mine. We always during recess we were like we wanted to be on the SWAT team. We wanted to do, all these things. We'd actually ran these drills, like these simulated drills, like on the playground. I'm like, who thinks of this stuff, And I just had this calling, and like my mom remarried to my stepdad, who was basically my dad. He taught me a lot of things about life. Very kind, very loving man. Loved me like his own, which was awesome. Just taught me how to be who I am today, So, growing up with a blended family had its challenges. I was the baby, and then I turned into the middle child. And oh my God, dealing with a baby, the new baby, when I was the old baby, man, that was rough. But I learned a lot growing up, and just about just how to live with that. All the changes. One of my top strengths is adaptability, which is part of the reason why I'm in the career I am now. Just being able to roll with it was one of the big things that I learned. So in high school, September 11th happened. I remember waking up, and I had one of those old TV alarm clocks. I don't know if you ever seen those. Those weighed like 300 pounds, I swear, and like maybe a 4-inch screen TV. And I remember I had it set to the news when my alarm went off. The TV would turn on, and I remember all of a sudden I'm like, I just see these buildings burning, and I'm like, what the fuck is that? What is going on? And I thought it was an accident. And then I remember getting up, getting ready for school, telling my mom, like, hey, a plane ran into the Twin Towers. And she's like, what? So she turned on the news, and then that's when the second plane hit. And I remember that was just like everything just changed here for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I remember having to go to school, and there was just so much chaos and confusion. But for me, I was just like, I want to do something about that. And I didn't know what it looked like, I thought about maybe military, and I had some parental influence that was like, I don't want you joining the military. So I was like, I don't know. So I thought of law enforcement and fire, maybe EMS, but law enforcement was kind of my original direction. And so that was kind of the beginning of the start of where I am now. So let me see. I got into college, started, I got old enough to start testing, and it was tough. It's very competitive, especially over in Washington, living over there. And
did you go to college and get any background in criminal justice? Like, what did you go to college for to help you get into the career you're in now?
That's what I started to. So the community college I was at, they had a criminal justice undergrad, and it was really cool. I took some forensic science classes. I learned how to do all the fingerprinting and learn how to, I pretty much geeked out about that kind of stuff. I was like, as I've learned in the career, like what Hollywood proceeds or, portrays, totally different than what it is. But I was still super interested in, a lot of that aspect of the job, the crime scene, and, learning about the Bill of Rights and all that stuff.
Right.
I loved it. And unfortunately, when I was in the middle of it, they ended up like disbanding that degree program. I'm not sure why, funding or not enough interest or what, but I kind of just got burnt out at that point because at the time I was living on my own, college, working 2 jobs, trying to just pay for it all, and just I just got burnt out, and I pretty much just finished whatever classes I needed, and then I just stopped altogether, continuing to pursue any sort of education. But yeah, so then I worked in the restaurant business while that was happening. So that really kind of helped me be very. That's what made me really want to like just talk to people. I love talking to people, connecting with people, and I was like, I could just make a career out of this. A lot of people do. And then there was just like a string of events that happened within my family around that time. So my grandmother was living in Kentucky at the time. Actually, I'm going to rewind a little bit. Right when I got out of high school, maybe a year or two, my parents ended up moving to Idaho, my mom and my stepdad. And what they ended up doing was they said, you guys can come with us, or you guys can stay here and, do your thing. And I'm like, Idaho? I'm like, why do I want to move to Idaho? There's nothing over there. And, I remember visiting them. They lived in a little town called Wilder.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know where Wilder's at. Shout out. Population, I think at the time was like maybe 800 in the city limits. And I was just like, they built a house out there close to the river. I was like, this is kind of cool. Like, I remember visiting, had no cell phone service until we got into Caldwell. And I was like, this is kind of out there. And coming from a bigger city, I was like, it's nice to visit. I don't think I'd ever see myself out there or out here in Idaho. So, back to, my grandmother. My grandmother, she was living alone at the time in Kentucky. I don't remember the reason why, but she was living there. But my parents ended up convincing her to move to Idaho. And it was strange. She was trying to get, established here, and just wasn't feeling right. She ended up going to the hospital, and my grandmother, I remember her. She never complained a day in her life, and for her to go to the hospital, that was a big deal. And it seemed like they were going to discharge her. And I remember my mom was advocating for her. She's like, "There's something wrong," And there was a doctor that walked by, overheard the conversation, looked at my grandmother's chart and was like, she's got to go. They did emergency transfer. She coded in the middle of the emergency transfer. So she ended up having a transected aorta. Mm. And they were able to keep her stable enough to perform surgery. But the doctors were not very optimistic at all. They gave her a pretty slim chance to live.
Yeah, that's a pretty severe medical condition.
Oh, 100%, yeah. So, and it was around the same time too. There was another incident shortly after, and granted, this all happened like in and around my parents' house. So I had my second cousin was visiting, and she ended up having a heart attack as well at my parents' house.
Wow.
Luckily, somebody knew CPR and performed CPR until first responders got there. And they got pulses back. And HIPAA laws, you don't always know when you get pulses back or what the outcome is of a patient. So all that was going on around the same time. So my second cousin and my grandmother, they were both recovering at the same hospital around the same time. And my grandmother made a full recovery.
Wow.
So did my cousin. My grandmother lived another 10 years after
Holy
that.
cow.
Yeah. And she she took advantage of that 10 years. You know, she did all, I think she did more in that 10-year span than she did in her entire life, you know, ride motorcycles, like everything, like river rafting. She was in her 70s, like just getting after it. I'm like, that is awesome. And my cousin, she to this day, she's still kicking it. She still lives over in Washington. And it's interesting because they were both, after they got discharged, they were recovering at my parents' house. That kind of seemed to be the central hub of tragedy and recovery. But they were both recovering. My grandmother was, I don't remember what happened, or if she was not feeling right or slipped in the shower or something, but they called 911 again, and the first responders came out, and the person who had responded on my cousin responded again. And it was one of those moments where you're just like, he had this moment where, like, I've been here before.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've experienced that too.
Yeah.
Like it, I know I have, but I was like, oh, I've been here before. This sounds fairly familiar. And you don't want to like ask how are they doing? Because, you know, last time you saw them, they either had like a tube down their throat or they were just in critical condition. And it's just like, but he ended up asking my mom, like, by the way, how's she doing? And my mom's response was, she's actually out on the back patio drinking coffee, and I bet she'd love to see you.
Oh.
So, so my family became really close with, ended up finding out that was the assistant chief of the small department out in Wilder, he's now chief. They became really close. My parents were bikers. And the chief ended up, he was also a biker, him and his wife, and they became really close, started riding. And, you know, that's when I was like, kind of helped re-spark my interest in, you know, the first responder world. I found out that he was also the chief deputy coroner, used to work law enforcement, was the assistant chief, ran EMS, used to be the mayor of Wilder. Actually, he's the mayor again now.
I was gonna say, when you're in Wilder, you have a lot of different hats.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, all right, okay, I need to change job when you have that small of a population. Like, people that are listening, Wilder is a very small farm town in Idaho.
Yeah.
And we actually used to live pretty close out there. And so, yeah, you have a lot of different hats that you wear.
Yeah. And I just looked up to that, you know, I was just like, wow, this is awesome. Remember him sharing stories and stuff like that. Like, this is great. And then, you know, started to become, you know, more acquainted with them. And I was like, sweet, I'm all right. I'm going to start looking into the, you know, EMT, looking into that over, and I was still in Washington at the time. And then I had another string of events that happened in my family. My stepdad, he ended up having a heart attack, and 46 years old. And that was tough. Because, you know, guess who responded? You know, you think about, you know, small town that you only have so many people, you get to know everybody. And, you know, that was just a defining moment for our family, just changed everything. You know, my stepdad, I really looked up to him, and I just think about the last thing he said to me, and he was just proud of me. He didn't care what I did in life as long as I was happy. But he was proud of who I was as a person. And so he passed away. It was probably one of the man, I don't even know where to describe how it felt. It was just heavy. A lot of the emotions behind it. And at the time, I didn't really know how to deal with emotions. That that was one of the things that, you know, I feel like in our culture, you know, being a man is like, we don't do feelings. Feelings aren't anything. Feelings aren't real, right? And I didn't know what to do with that, so I just stuffed it down. And then, you know, going back to normal life, you know, just struggled through depression and everything, and then just trying to get through, you know, go through the motions of life, and then it was about 6 months later, so I think around just after Thanksgiving in 2010, the house that my parents built caught fire.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and that's when I knew I just needed to be here, and it was shortly after that. I flew over. I just saw the just carnage and everything. It's every time I see or hear about a house fire, my heart just drops, because I know how just traumatic it is. And you know, traveling out here and seeing all that, I just knew that I was like, I got to get here. And shortly after, maybe a year or less, I called that assistant chief up, and I was like, "Hey, what do I got to do to get into this industry? Because I want to give back as a volunteer." I didn't even, at the time, like, I was like, I don't even care if I make this a career. I just wanted to just give back to the community that helped my family so much over that short time. And he just says, "Hey, if you fly over here, you know, or if you move over here, I'll put you to work." And he did. So I went through EMT. We did an in-house class, and it's funny. I kind of give him a hard time because, you know, he called everything like a A&P, you know, anatomy physiology portion. He'd call everything a gizmo. So I'm like, this gizmo does this and that gizmo does that. So I had to, like, you know, remember just studying, you know, human anatomy and just trying to be like, okay, this gizmo is actually, you know, a pancreas, and it produces insulin to, you know, so, but I was able to get my EMT and started volunteering that way, running medical calls, running fires, trained in-house, and then they had a full-time position open, and I put in for it, and they offered it to me, and I accepted. So I've been doing that I've been a full-timer for over 10 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how is that? I mean, we have talked about this, you know, obviously not on the podcast, but you moving here, you kind of embracing the culture, you've experienced on the other side of the first responders what it's like to have your house be on fire and have the medical calls. How does that transition to you now being the provider and having to see still those traumatic things happening to other people?
Well, biggest thing is I just feel so much empathy and compassion for everybody that has an emergency. And that was one of the early things that I learned in my career, is that it's not my emergency, it's their emergency. And like, I've really been able to it changed the way I approach that. So, like, you know, I'm not going crazy if I'm going in on a fire. I'm not, like, you know, I'm not destroying everything. You know, I'm being very mindful, and I mean, doing the best I can, because I know this is somebody's stuff. That's, you know, granted, stuff can be replaceable, but there's some things out there that are just invaluable, that people just, they appreciate that you're able to at least, you know, take care of.
Right.
Same thing on the medical side too, you know. I look at it as, you know, how, if this was my family member and I was and I was treating my family member, how would I present myself, you know? And you know, unfortunately, I have had to be in that position to treat family members, and because I was volunteering and also working in the small town that I was that I started in. So yeah, that got that got a little interesting. So yeah, it definitely helped me out with as far as connecting with those who were struggling with what they're experiencing in that moment. So yeah.
And how do you deal with yourself seeing all these things? I know that you have talked about, you know, the story with your cats and kind of getting into that, but like what is that for you personally?
Well, I do a lot of self-care. And the biggest thing was the pandemic changed that. You know, I was going to counseling before the pandemic. Anyway, because I turned 30. You know, almost 7 years ago. I'll be 37 on Monday. So,
Hey, shout out to you.
Shout out to me. But yeah, 30. I just realized that I hit 30, and I realized that there was just a lot of trauma, not just from work, but a lot of trauma that I just went through, just growing up. You know, dealing with that didn't realize, and things that I didn't even realize, right? Like you think about like, oh, that's not that big of a deal. Oh, you know, it's not a big deal if you acknowledge it in the moment and acknowledge feelings. But I spent at that point 30 years not knowing what fucking feelings were. It was like, holy shit. It was kind of like a brick wall that hit me. And you know, I really struggled with just who is Bryan? Like, you know, I used to think that I spent all these years seeking this external validation of, you know, getting everybody's stamp of approval, but I didn't have that stamp of approval of myself. There was a lot of shame and a lot of guilt that I carried for a long time. And when I turned 30, it, you know, started working through that. And there's a lot of layers, you know. They talk about, you know, there's that old saying, you know, that like it's like an onion, right? And there's so many layers upon layers, and around the pandemic, I was really starting to get to some of that deep shit. And man. Whew. I'm feeling that deep shit right now. Feeling it right in my chest. So, which is good. It's good that I'm able to acknowledge it now, whereas before I wasn't able to do that. But let me see. We're about maybe 6 months into the pandemic, and I remember just feeling so low, you know. At that point, you know, there was still a lot of unknowns of, you know, what COVID was or what it's doing. And, you know, there was just a lot of noise going on in the world about, you know, vaccines versus anti-vaccines, and a lot of news stuff. And like at that point, I mean, it was just like Groundhog's Day, you know. I'd get up, I'd go to work my 48, come home, and then like pretty much confined to this house, and, you know, and do it all over again. So counseling my therapy ended up going to a screen, and it wasn't doing it for me. I needed that connection, that in-person connection. So there was just a lot going on in my personal life. And I don't remember why I ended up being locked. I just closed myself off in this room, and I just remember just it being dark, and I just opened up my door to my closet. I remember just seeing my gun, And I was just like, I can do this. Like, I was just feeling so much pain, and I was just suffering at the time. And then the I can turned in I'm going to do this. And I remember grabbing my gun, and as I was loading it and getting ready to just fucking end it all, I ended up my persistent cat, who doesn't like doors closed, ended up just scratching and was just being obnoxious and trying to bang the door down. And I ended up snapped me out of that just moment. And and I just had this moment of clarity of being like, because at the time I was reading this book, I just had this moment of clarity. It brought me back to this book that I was reading, that there was this part, it's called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And the reason why he wrote that book had to do with the similar feeling that I was experiencing, just feeling this despair. And there was this quote I remember. He just said, he remembers feeling just super low and with despair, that I can't live with myself. And to expand on that, there's the I and then the yourself or myself. I can't live with. So, and his logic was like, if that's the case, and there's two of us, so one of those must be false, because really there's just only one of us, right? So that really kind of just made sense to me at that moment. I was like, it's not that I couldn't live with myself as Bryan. I just couldn't live with what I was experiencing. And that was kind of like a turning point to me, to just be like, I gotta work through this and see this through, see what happens. I gotta lean into that discomfort even more and reach out for help. And I did. I doubled down on therapy. And I just started making connections with people. I have a really close, I call them my closest advisors, that we just share everything. Group of guys, and that we just started talking about just our shit, and because everybody has it.
Right.
And that was just kind of like the beginning of my, I guess spiritual journey now. Cause that's really what it is, I've had this belief now that we're all spiritual beings living human experience. And that was just kind of been my take on life ever since, and been doing the work and, just educating myself. I fortunately, at the time I thought it was unfortunate, but it's interesting. I was actually talking about this in therapy today, that, I had a long-term relationship that she was, starting to get into psychology, and, was working on being a counselor and stuff like that. And I remember her sharing all this stuff, but it was like a garden, like a fire hose to the face. Like, I was like, I can't deal with any of this right now. But, looking back, I have a lot of gratitude of actually introducing some of that, because it's now making sense, and I'm inspired more than ever to continue to do the work. And yeah.
What does the work look like for you?
I think it's a day-to-day thing. The biggest thing is like, biggest thing for me is mindfulness, just being mindful of what's going on, and like within me, around me, self-love. I didn't, like I mentioned earlier, I had a lot of shame and a lot of guilt about, my past, and giving myself love, not, not necessarily, excusing all of my past behavior, like, but just giving myself like love, like, hey, that wasn't okay. And, you're not a bad person. You just did a bad thing. That's kind of what I've learned, that, between shame and guilt. But, and just seeing others, as they are, I feel like there's just a lot of suffering going on in the world. And, it's, I as much love as I've been able to give myself, like, I want to share that with the world now. And that looks like, whether it's, walking down the street and seeing somebody who looks like they're having a bad day, or grocery clerk who just looks just battered because it's the holidays and they've been working their ass off trying to, like, the thing is, like, we don't know, like, I don't know what that person's life is like.
Mm-hmm.
For all I know, they're having, like, the worst day of their life. And if somebody notices them, I know for me, that's huge. So when I get noticed, but being able to just make those connections, I think humans need connection.
For sure.
And, in the fire service, and even in the EMS service, we have all these connections. We have brother and sisterhood. And that was another reason why I was drawn to that, the whole family orientation of the business. And just, that's, and part of the reason why I'm so excited to be here is that I'm able to, just share my experience, and so that others can connect and understand that they're not alone.
Yeah.
I know that's kind of what, I mean, yeah.
I know it's very hard for you to talk about this topic and nerves and but I do want to, one, thank you that you are still here with us today, and that your cat, kind of snapped you out of what was occurring.
Yeah.
And this, and I've talked on different episodes about, sometimes you just need to stop that train of thought that's happening, because, like you said, it's the I and myself. Is it me? Is it, we start looking internally on everything that's going wrong, and then you just kind of start going down a spiral, and you don't feel like you can stop that spiral, and the only thing that's going to happen is hit rock bottom.
Right.
And that could look different to, anybody. Through all of this, you have work, you have your family trauma, you have your childhood trauma. I mean, you, like you said, you had all these layers within your onion. How did you actually reach out to therapy? Because I think, especially, with being a first responder, with being a male, with being the tough-minded, and all these things that you're expressing, how did you take that step to actually getting the help? Because I know that is the bridge that a lot of people have a hard time with, where they may know that they need the help, they don't know where to reach out to. You had obviously gotten the therapy, you were already in the therapy, but, like, what was that step between those two? Did you go to your chief? Did you go to, like, who did you reach out to?
Unfortunately, I think at the time, it still, like, the whole mental health really wasn't all that, like, accepted. You're, and also the pressures of, being a man, you're supposed to just fucking take care of it. And so I didn't feel safe enough to talk or reach out to certain individuals, like, within my work environment. That's a great question, because, I think it might have just been one of those things where I was told that you should go to therapy. And I'm like, I did it as a means of of pleasing another person initially. At the same time, I'm also very thankful that I unwillingly went because, I started to realize that I was using things, substances and other things to cope with all that pain that I didn't want to deal with. Alcohol, sex, pornography, screen time, using all these things to kind of just veg out. And once I started to realize that, I was like, oh, this is a problem. Like, I need to do something about it. And I mean, yeah, and it took a couple of, I guess, rock bottoms for me to realize that that I really need to just take care of this. Otherwise, I will end up just another statistic of first responder that committed suicide.
Right.
Or a first responder that, did something egregious, that ends up in the news. And, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be that. It's crazy.
Do you still go to therapy?
I do. Yeah. Actually, I
think you mentioned you were
there
earlier, right?
I tuned myself up this morning before I came here just so I could talk about it, talk about this today. I've been doing a lot of EMDR therapy with a trauma therapist. She's awesome. We're starting to do just kind of this lifespan, 0 to 5, 6 to, and working through that. And it's been great. The progress that I've made this year has been awesome. Especially, holidays, holidays can be heavy. There's a lot going on, crazy. There's a lot of crazy energy out there, with people like being stressed and, just thinking about my own experience of, the holidays and being like, man, here I am. I'm thinking about, I'm almost 37. I don't have my own family. I don't have a wife. There's a lot of emotion that came up for me, and I'm just like, man, I feel like I was supposed to be at a certain benchmark when it came to where I thought I was going to be in my life. And I know you experienced that with your 30th birthday episode.
Yep.
And, but it's honestly, it's not my timeline. It's whenever it's supposed to happen.
Right. And I think especially, marking on the holidays, because we have just gone through them, we still got New Year's, we got these things going on. Reach out to the people, that don't have the families, that don't have the boyfriends, don't have the girlfriends. Like, they will feel the most alone when everybody's gathering, because exactly like you said, they don't have the spouse, they don't have the kids. I am very guilty of that this year. Like, there's been different family dynamics within all of us, and there's just been a lot of change, and it does make you look inward of like, this is kind of the holiday magic really comes a lot from kids. And when you don't have those younger kids to kind of bring that magic to you, you do feel alone. And I think for anybody listening, the holidays can feel more alone to people, but yet that's when we're supposed to feel the most connected, and that's kind of how we've gotten away from the true holiday traditions. It's the presents, it's the, the gifts and all these things. But I do feel what you mean of the holidays can feel very alone.
100%. And one of the things that I wanted to do this year, or I guess moving forward, is now that I've been recognizing that, I have nieces and nephews, and actually I have a grandnephew as well. And like, just interacting with them and creating those memories of being like, oh, this is Uncle Bryan. Because I felt when I went to when I was in that space of just being so like in that dark place, I missed out on a lot. And, I had to work through some of that guilt of being like, oh, I wasn't there for this. I wasn't present for that. I might have been physically there, but I just wasn't all there.
Right. You weren't mentally there.
Yeah.
You were completely in a different headspace.
Yeah. I was checked out. I was like, just, vegging out, whether it's on, like it's on my phone or just, it's incredible. Like, and part of the reason why I'm like just sharing my story is like letting people know that you're not alone. Obviously, we are never alone, and that it's okay to not be okay sometimes. Like
for sure.
And that's something that I had to learn. I feel like sometimes the hard way.
But nobody teaches us these things, right? And
Right.
I think that is one of my biggest pushes for this podcast, of having people come on and just whatever your story looks like, sharing that, because we have different behaviors, we have different coping, we have different variables within our lives. But I think at the end of the day, it's like there's something that you can say that somebody else can connect with, and nobody's really teaching us about mental health. We're seeing the repercussions of that now, because this is, we're seeing these things post-COVID. We're seeing these things just lifelong. We don't really have to fight for anything. Like everything's so accessible, but yet we don't take care of ourselves because we're always running to the next thing. We're always chasing the next thing. We're never really stopping and pausing, seeing how we feel, right? Like we don't talk about those things. When kids express kind of their frustration, that's usually when they get in trouble, and then you go put them in timeout. Well, that's now they're by themselves. Like we don't really have anything teaching us how to work through these problems. And so we find the least resistance, which is usually negative aspects, and go down that route.
Right.
And I think, like you had said, like the connection with people, like you don't know who will ever hear this and be like, wow, just like one phrase he said, that really connected with me. That really resonated with me. And I think that's why this podcast, I want it to be so open and, boundaryless, if that's even a word, because who are we to judge, or who am I to judge on somebody's story? Because everybody has their own story.
100%. And I'm so glad you brought up the whole judgment aspect, because, one of the reasons why I didn't feel safe was like that fear of judgment, that fear of rejection. And I think because I've learned to just love myself and just be in that space, like it's okay. That has not, it changed my perspective into being like, I may feel rejected, but I don't reject myself. Not rejecting myself has been huge in my own growth. Because you're absolutely right. Like we all have our own backgrounds. We all have our own stories, and just being able to just hold space. I think that's the biggest thing. Is I feel like humans in general just want somebody that can hold space for them and not have that, not react in a negative way, but react in a loving way. And I think through my own journey, I've been able to do that. I personally feel like that's what I am meant to do in my own journey in life, is to just be a person that doesn't, judge,
Right.
I mean, granted, we all judge, to a certain degree, but like just accept them as they are in that moment.
Right.
Because, it's a blip in the whole grand scheme of things in their life, just because they reacted in a certain way, that doesn't define who they are as a person. And, And it's challenging sometimes, because, you have your own, like I have my own triggers, or I have my own things, quirks that kind of, it can get under my skin. So that's one of the things why mindfulness for me and just working with that, has been huge, doing the body checks, doing the breathing. I realized I don't breathe enough. I mean, so, yeah, I just do little things that just kind of help throughout the day that kind of help me just be like, okay, why am I feeling really heavy right now? And then just kind of do a reflection on, or journal, or even meditate. Yeah, I do. Yeah. And also, to talk about real quick, to touch on, the mental health, you're absolutely right. We don't teach this. We teach a lot of like physicality, like physical fitness and eating healthy and stuff like that. But we don't talk about like the thing that's in between our ears. Is, I think that's the most important thing of all. And also, yeah. Anyways.
I think too, there's so many different modalities that can help people, whether that go for a walk, whether that go, take a bath, where I think we want it to be these extravagant, like, just like weight loss, right? Everybody wants a pill to have weight loss. Everybody also wants this magic pill to like be mentally clear. And that's just not how it works. It takes little tiny things building up to something bigger, and you make progress, and nobody has it perfect and nobody does it perfect. And sometimes you're like, whoa, that didn't help me. So I'm going to go to my next, tool in my toolbox. How do you kind of incorporate this within the firehouse at all? I mean, because I know that there is a lot of stigma. We've talked about a lot of stigma within, the first responders. How are you, besides, talking about it, really kind of helping them break that? Because my true feeling is that it has to start within, and kind of like that egg has to be cracked and kind of webbed out, because we are the ones inside there, and having these outsiders, there's so many walls trying to get through us first responders. You don't know me, or you don't, understand what we see. Like, how are you've gone through the therapy, you're going through the therapy. How are you kind of spreading that within your firehouse?
Just being open about it, I think, especially after a critical call, we joke, we obviously have some morbid humor. Mm-hmm. If people heard exactly what we talked about.
I just choked on my coffee, but I also, not very many people know that I have, I don't even know if I can say this joke out loud, but I know I'm not going to.
We can edit that later, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. I'll tell you after this, because it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad today when I was like, oh yeah, okay, there's my morbid brain going off.
But we need that sometimes, right? It's kind of one of our ways of coping.
It for sure is.
And like the way that I see that now is like, oh, okay, yeah, we need that laughter, we need that. But it also sets a little reminder. My alarm is like, oh, that must have been really intense for you, or there must have been a lot of feelings that came up for you. And one of the things that I like to do is like, wow, I just say, wow, that felt like XYZ, whatever that may have come up for me at the moment. Right. And because I'm able to do that, like, I feel like there's less work to be done later down the road, because I'm able to process it in the moment. It's, I listened to some of your past podcasts with your first responders, and it's, oh man, it's been some heavy shit.
Yeah.
And it's people that aren't even in the business anymore. And like, I can just sense that, oh my God, the last episode that with Connor. Yeah. I was just like, holy shit. and I can imagine that brought up some things for me. I can imagine that brought up some things for you as well. And
I have definitely, and this is something to talk about. Within the last kind of month, I have felt heavy because, there are some times where I feel like this is a little bit of a counseling session for people.
Yeah.
I mean, that is what I went to school for. Like, I went for psychology. I always wanted to be a counselor. And I've had friends, they're like, you should get your counseling. I'm like, I kind of do that already, like that's just my nature. I want to hold that open space. I want to hold that loving and connection within people. And I'm very proud of myself for being able to kind of be that safe space for people. But that also means that can drain me. And that means that what I am hearing, what I'm experiencing, what I'm talking about, these dialogues that we're having, they do bring up a lot of my past as well. And I will say there was a situation yesterday with, somebody in my life that really kind of sparked a trigger in me. And I knew that I was agitated, and I knew that, it really kind of took me into my own just thoughts, and those feelings come back again, and frustration comes back, and you're like, why did this happen to me? Like all of the things. And I was like, all right, this is what you're feeling. You need to be outside. And I went for a walk. I was outside for almost an hour on the greenbelt. I was watching somebody fly fish. I was looking at the rocks. I was like, I remember Mel Robbins, like, when you start looking for love, you're going to find love in anything. Like, love doesn't have to be between partners. Like, love can look like saying hi to the grocery clerk, right?
Yeah.
Like, that love can look like such tiny little things I think that's just like what's happening in life right now. Like, we want these extravagant things, and like, they're really tiny. Like, we don't need much to make us happy.
We don't. I have this huge smile on my face right now because you're just like, you're speaking my language right now. You're absolutely right. I feel like there's so much focus on like materialistic things, like especially with Christmas, and all this stuff. And I've been working on shifting that with my own journey of being like, let's have some experiences instead of things.
Yeah.
Like let's create some memories. And
I think, to touch on the point of like, when you feel that trigger, like, I just remember yesterday and being like, I'm outside, I'm doing these things, and somebody was like, oh, Mercy, like, are you doing okay? And I was like, yep, I'm outside. I just booked my energy healer. Like, I've got her this week, like, these are my tools that I have.
Yeah.
And what I realized, I was like, whoa, I was like, Mackenzie, like, I'm actually really proud of you. Like, you recognize that earlier instead of letting that stew for days and weeks and then getting to what I would always call the champagne effect, where you stuff everything, you don't talk about it, and then the cork flies, and those are all your emotions. And I was, yes, I do still do that sometimes. It gets the best of us. But that's the thing, is that you can recognize what your body's doing, how you're feeling, and try to fix it. And if it's, if the walk didn't help, then do something else. And I know I reached out to my family. I know there was these things that happened afterwards where it's like, I'm just rehabbing myself, like, okay, after a house fire, you rehab it, you tear down the walls, you look at the smoke, damage, like, you do these things to rehab it. Like, let's rehab ourselves.
Oh, 100%. So I like how you the recognize. So it reminded me of this technique I use. You want to talk about, a Rolodex of things that we have, tools in our toolbox. But Tara Brach, she has some books out and does a lot of mindfulness meditations. But she uses this acronym called RAIN. So recognize, allow, whatever that may be, investigate why, and then nurture it. So it looks like you just naturally just did that. Like, you just recognized it, you allowed it, and investigated like, oh man, this, and then you just nurtured it by going on the walk. I mean, it sounds like being outdoors is one of your go-tos. That's awesome. What else do you like to do?
Journaling is another big one of mine.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I will actually give a shout out to Mo. He was, I think he was actually one of your top, like when I asked on Instagram.
Oh, yeah. I love Mo.
Yeah. So he had talked about when you are journaling, write in third person, right? Like, Mackenzie felt this way, kind of like being the outsider.
Right.
And I remember getting home that day and I wrote about the podcast in my journal. And I'm kind of one of those people where, and I think this is the normalizing it, where it's like, I don't journal every single day. I journal when I feel like I need to journal. Like I need to get it out on paper. I need to get it out of my system. And I will usually kind of flip back to random pages and read it and be like, oh, wow, I didn't realize I, was feeling that way or whatnot. And so Christmas night, actually, I was journaling and I had looked back and I had reread my journal entry from when Mo was on the podcast and I wrote it in third person. And I was like, oh my goodness, this really does help. And so then when I journaled again, I kind of journaled how I normally do, like just getting your thoughts out. Then I did a third person, and then I kind of gave a shout out to Mo in my journal because I was like, that did help me. I did not realize it helped me when I was writing it, but rereading it, I was like, whoa, like you are right. Like Mackenzie was doing this, and why did that happen? Nature, 1,000% is my go-to. Being outside, the mountains are super healing to me.
Grand Canyon.
The Grand Canyon. Yeah. Yes, I'll do that I'll do that in a heartbeat again. But I think it's just understanding, like what are we doing on a daily basis to help prevent us as well? Like we take medications on a daily basis because that's what we need to do for our bodies. One of my, it's kind of like an in and out thing, but I think right now in the cycle of my life is like the gym. Like the gym is the best thing, is the best antidepressant that you can have. Like you're moving your body, you're feeling good, and life happens and we get busy and we, kind of get knocked off the rail. But the thing that we have to do is get back on it.
Yeah.
Like we can't just like sit there and be like, okay, well, I'm not going to do it again. Like get back on the railroad. Like let's continue to go and not judge ourselves of like, oh, I didn't do good on that. Like find your high points. Hey, you did do this well. You did process that, faster than you normally do. Like those are your highlights and those are your kind of like aha moments of what mental health should look like, or could look like.
100%. I couldn't agree more with what you just said. It's almost like it. I think what you. So did you? Just to recap, are you
interviewing me now?
I think so.
Finally,
yeah. Or do some active listening here. This is one of the active listening techniques that I've picked up over the years, just to make sure I'm on the same page. So if I understanding right, you read a previous entry, and then did you journal about that previous entry? And
no, but I journaled the same way as that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Previous journal.
Okay.
So it was completely different situation that I was journaling about. But when I had reread, I had picked up the technique from Mo of writing in third person.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, I really like that. So then I did that same technique again.
Okay.
When I journaled the other night.
That's awesome. I love journaling too. I like to call it, and that's where I found a lot of my own self-compassion is like, wow, I was really, like you said, I was really feeling that way. I like to call those, I think Brene Brown coined the term like shitty first draft, of just writing out. It doesn't matter what it is, just write it out. And because that's what you're feeling and thinking in that moment. Mm-hmm. And then circling back and just having that like, oh, wow. that was intense, and then kind of processing through that. So I think that's awesome. It's awesome you're able to do that. I haven't tried that mode technique, although it sounds, I think I'm going to have to revisit that podcast and,
yeah, because I hadn't remembered that he had mentioned it until I had read it.
okay.
And I was like, oh, I forgot about this. Another one, this is kind of a I'm going to say a hippy dippity thing, but it also,
I love hippy dippy stuff.
It also just like be open to what could work for you. You know, I started going to a energy healer, and she does sound therapy as well.
Okay.
And I absolutely love her. She gives me a lot of clarity. She also like, we hold on to so much in our muscles, in our bodies, and everything's energy in the world. And so I know like I had talked about this last kind of month with these heavy conversations, I could feel myself holding on to them. And then, kind of when you feel heavy, I'm like, oh, I need to go see Michelle. Like, she needs to clear my energy out, and she's super wonderful. I've had such great success with her. So if anybody wants to go see an energy healer, it's amazing and astonishing, like what she picked up on within 30 seconds of my first session. I was like, I literally messaged you last night at 10:30. I'm here this morning at 10. And there was no way she could like have found that information online. Like there's, people are like, oh, they know this about you, or they, I'm like, no, there's literally no way she would have known any of that.
She's not Miss Cleo or anything.
No.
Who remembers Miss Cleo? Anybody? Am I dating myself?
I don't. Uh-oh, JP's laughing.
Uh-oh, JP, do you know Miss Cleo? Oh, no, dude. Oh, man. Okay, yeah. Yeah. She used to be one of those on the TV, like psychics on TV, like call in to this 800 number.
I think I do. Okay, I think I do remember that. I'm the worst at TV or anything like that. But all right, Bryan, as we kind of wrap up, what is something that you want to leave the listeners with from your journey in life?
The learning doesn't stop with everything. And that's one. And the other thing is just to kind of have a beginner's mindset. Just always be open to anything. You don't always know what's going on in somebody's life. And just keep learning. Just keep, my own journey is that, the learning's not going to stop. It never will. I'm always going to be learning about myself as things progress, things change. This isn't the world that I lived in 20 years ago. Totally different. And with just how everything's going, it's going to change for this foreseeable future. So, my plan's to live, till I'm at least 100. So there's a lot of learning to be done left. It just doesn't stop. So, yeah.
Well, cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on and speaking your story to the listeners and to the fellow first responders. And listeners, if you feel, a pull or a draw to wanting to come on to the podcast and share whatever your story is, definitely reach out to me on my website, rawthoughtspodcast.com. You can always head over to Instagram at rawthoughts.podcast. And always remember too, if you need a realtor, I am your go-to girl. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you, Bryan, for coming on, being vulnerable, talking about, just kind of life as it is and what your process has been. So thank you.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And like I said before we started, this dream come true,
Yay.
So I feel like there's more, and like I said, there might be a next time, right?
Perfect. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for another episode, and I will see you next week. Bye, guys. Thank you again for listening to another episode of Raw Thoughts Podcast. I'd appreciate it if you could follow, like, subscribe, and share with anybody that you think would be interested in this. You can also head over to my website at rawthoughtspodcast.com and see any other guests that have been on the episodes. If You could also go over to Instagram and follow at rawthoughts.podcast. I would really appreciate it, and always send me a message if you're interested in being a guest or any feedback.